Well, today we're speaking with Sammy Walker Herrera, who is a public speaking coach with high-level clients such as Amazon, Hitachi, and Google, and training to be an ADHD coach in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Thank you so much for spending time with us.
Thank you, Catherine. I'm excited to be here and talk more about what I do.
Can you tell us first, since this is our main interest, when were you diagnosed and what led to it?
Yes, I was diagnosed with ADHD when I was 26, which was a few years ago. It's almost going to be 4 years now, this upcoming summer. There was actually some stop gaps where I could have been diagnosed at the age of 24. However, there were second opinions I needed to get, and there were doubts that people in my life had as well, which stopped that process for a little bit.
What led to your seeking a diagnosis?
What led to me seeking a diagnosis was graduating from my master's program. I'd been in school from kindergarten right through my master's. After that, I had so much trouble being organized, prioritizing, delegating, having a strong sense of where to put my time, constantly being late to work. It was interesting because I didn't get in trouble for those things a lot. The reason I didn't get in trouble was I didn't have that much supervision. There was one period where I didn't have a direct supervisor for 8 months. I was putting so much pressure on myself to hit this goal that no one was asking of me, recognizing that, okay, if someone gave me a 3-week project, you can bet on day 21, that was the day it was going to happen.
What kind of a job were you in that you didn't have a supervisor?
The role was diversity and inclusion events coordinator, pretty much, but it accidentally ended up being chief diversity officer. Think of someone who's 22, managing a lot of diversity inclusion programming, but also getting questions from higher level leaders on campus about diversity topics. There was one time someone from admissions asked me if it was okay to post hashtag Black History Month during Black History Month related to something appropriate to post on Twitter. That's when I realized the scope of my role exploded
Yeah.
without having these levels of leadership to provide more of that support and a lot more of the strategic aspects of diversity and inclusion rather than the programmatic or the direct student support.
You seem like an incredibly accomplished person. How long ago was that diagnosis at 26? How old are you now?
I'm currently 29, although it is also my birth month, so we'll hype that up.
Congratulations. What has changed for you?
What immediately changed for me from the diagnosis was a strong reduction of shame. Now, it wasn't complete elimination of shame, but there came a point where I realized that I had ADHD challenges and they weren't Sammy is a terrible person challenges. It wasn't even, oh, Sammy doesn't know how to organize, or Sammy struggles with prioritization, or Sammy can never keep her room clean. My core belief about myself was that I was a terrible person. Not about anything about functioning, just the core of who I am, something was wrong with me. Having that diagnosis really wiped away a lot of that shame, even without pills or skills. I didn't learn anything on how to be better at managing my ADHD, but it made me more open to exploring it. It made me more open to understanding myself, but there were still a number of blocks for me, especially because ADHD is a condition that I feel even in the last year, there's been so much more awareness. But even 3, 4 years ago, it still felt really stigmatizing. I knew as soon as I started telling, people were coming out the woodworks of my life and saying, I was considering a diagnosis or I started medication. And I realized that just being open about my diagnosis didn't change anything about my accomplishments. It just allowed me to connect with more people.
I think what you said about shame is really powerful and something we're finding out again and again from women that we talk to. Would you have described yourself as depressed or anxious or overcome by being too busy?
Throughout college, every single day, looking back at my schedules, I saw that my days were packed from 8 a.m. to 10 p.m. I always had somewhere to be or something to do. Overscheduling was the coping mechanism to not have that pause to feel my feelings. There were times in my life where I definitely felt depressed, and even looking back to both being in college, let alone my childhood, I can remember distinct times in summer vacation where something wasn't organized or scheduled for me, and I'm
Sure.
just lying on the couch like this for hours, practically paralyzed with indecision of what to do next, constantly ruminating about how disorganized I was or how can I optimize this. A lot of that maximizing that an 8-year-old doesn't need to do, but I was doing.
What was the difficulty in getting a diagnosis?
I only recently learned in the past year that my dad also has ADHD. I did find that out as he was terminally ill in the hospital, which is unfortunate. And it didn't even come from him specifically. I remember sitting down with him and taking a deep breath and saying, "Hey, Dad, I was recently diagnosed with ADHD, and I'm just wondering, do you happen to know anyone in your side of the family who also has ADHD?" And he's looking at me, and he was like a big Southern man from Kansas. And he looks at me and says, "You come by it honest. Southern for, I gave that to you."
Had he been diagnosed?
He had never had a formal diagnosis, but it's something that he knew about himself throughout his life and that impacted him a lot. I realized after just opening that conversation with him, he and I went right into conversation about his struggles with entrepreneurship. He was a construction worker and he had his own construction company, and how much of a struggle it was managing the administrative part, the financials and budget concerns. That's something we related to, given that I'm an entrepreneur as well. We talked about all the things that he had heard in school about his hyperactivity, because he was definitely more on the hyperactive side as well, or how much folks focused on his high potential and intellect, but really counted him out because of his impulsivity or how quickly his mind was running. Knowing that about him brought us a lot closer together.
What a gift. I bet you felt like, I wish there were more time to have these conversations, but how great that you got to have that one.
Yeah, and I realized for me that was just an act of bravery because every day there's some part of me that's still trying to chip away at that shame for the ADHD diagnosis. I was also recently diagnosed with autism 2 years later. Every day I make brave choices to speak to the people in my life who matter the most and not online haters. When I ignore them, it's a lot easier for me to recognize that the moments that mean the most to me are the ones where I'm brave and saying my truth.
Tell us about your memories from grade school. Was that a struggle for you looking back? Did you have big problems then?
Catherine, I need you to know this about me. I freaking loved school. I love structures. Being in ADHD coach training through ADCA, it is like going back to school all over again. I love it. I love having a syllabus. I love knowing what to focus on. I love discussions with my classmates. I personally don't consider ADHD a learning disability for myself. I can see how other people frame it, especially from their expertise or personal experience. I didn't have as much of a struggle when it came to grade school, middle school, maybe high school. That's when I started having subjects I didn't care about as much. When I started struggling with things like math and science, a lot of calculations and things like that. But I had like good friends by my side who we would be joking around while working on homework. So it was a lot easier to make that more fun. The structure of school, the expectations of school allowed me to buoy that quite a bit, even for classes that were required for me that weren't as easy. My sense of humor helped me out quite a lot too, because I can make a pun out of anything and then I can pay attention.
Did you have a sense of being different back then and not understanding why?
Oh, absolutely. Within my second year of grade school, I immediately was thrust into understanding I was quite different. I was in kindergarten and then I moved into the first grade. During the first weeks of first grade, my elementary school teacher handed me the books to do reading time with the rest of the students. My mom was pissed. She turned my daughter into the teacher. Why are you having her read to the rest of the class? So I started getting evaluated for gifted and talented programs specifically. I'm originally from South Texas, McAllen. The population's about 95% Mexican. I'm Mexican American on my mom's side. In the early 2000s, the location and culture, but I don't distinctly remember tests for neurodivergent conditions. In the first grade, I had a fourth grade reading level. Since the elementary school that had a gifted and talented program was the other side of town, they would skip me a grade in the same school because my parents couldn't afford to transport me to the other school. That was a tough experience. Socially moving into another grade with all these students who already knew each other. I had buddies in the first grade who immediately rejected me and said that I abandoned them. I felt very punished for being different. I was smaller than everyone. I was younger than everyone. There were times where I felt off connecting with people socially. I couldn't fully understand why. Looking back, I realized people were making fun of me, and I didn't know who to talk to about it, so I didn't really talk to anyone about it.
Do you wish that you had been diagnosed back then? Do you see some damage from the fact that you weren't diagnosed?
I knew you were going to ask this question. I thought a lot about this answer because I know about the mission for the Inattentive ADHD Coalition and finding the ADHD girls and having folks diagnosed by 8. I think that's something that can happen now. I don't know how beneficial it would have been for me to have been diagnosed when I was younger because of the culture. When it came to understanding special education or learning disabilities, there was gifted, there was the regular classes, there was special education, and there were such distinct areas that people didn't have the same understanding of twice exceptional or different levels of support needs when it comes to folks with ADHD, autism, dyspraxia, or other neurodiverse conditions. In some ways, I personally wonder if I were diagnosed with ADHD or autism when I was in elementary school, if my parents would have seen me as lower potential and would have treated me differently.
Good point. But given that there's a different culture now, would that have been an advantage? Do you feel like to have been diagnosed and gotten really good services back then? We're trying to figure out the toll on you, whether you'd gotten amazing services if you'd been diagnosed or not, since you weren't diagnosed.
Yeah. When it comes to young people, like children, 8 to 10, even younger, a lot of that is related to the quality of parenting, right? We can't control whether a parent has overt or covert biases, whether a parent has their own shame, whether a parent decides to go through their own diagnostic process. I can see that coloring some pieces. I also could see some folks focusing on only one area of treatment, like only medication, or maybe only coaching, and then being completely against medication, even though that possibly could be helpful for their child. What I believe is as long as a child has parents who are willing to learn, grow, willing to be humble, and they explore all the facets of ADHD support, then I think it is very healthy to be diagnosed earlier because what's better and more important than life than that self-discovery?
So, in very personal terms, do you think that not being diagnosed and supported for your own ADHD has done some harm to you? It seems like you're
Yeah.
confident, and that's fantastic. It seems like you've really gotten past the shame to be actually teaching people public speaking, which is all about getting past that. But do you think that things could have been better in some way had you been supported?
I think a lot of things could have been better. There could have been a more of a focus on me getting out there and physically active earlier in my life. There could have been more structure for me in the unstructured times of my life, like summer vacations or winter breaks. Perhaps some of my strengths that come up with my ADHD, like distractibility because of humor. You don't know how many dance classes I've interrupted because I thought of something that I thought was funnier and more important than the class.
Yeah.
If some of those strengths would have been understood more, perhaps they could have been leveraged as, hey, maybe Sammy should be in a comedy writing class, or maybe we should make sure that we go to comedy shows more regularly because that's really going to engage and inspire her.
So, what did you do differently after you got the diagnosis? Do you mind speaking about whether you take medication or what changed?
I'll say immediately after the diagnosis, I still had quite a bit of grief and shame. I remember downloading a few books about ADHD and not being able to get through them. Not because I have ADHD, but just the sense of that acceptance, right? Oh, if I read through this book, I have to accept it, or I have to do all the exercises. The sense of full commitment by reading these books was a little overwhelming for me. Medication has been something I've been exploring, especially in the last 6 months. I've mainly tried non-stimulants. I've tried a stimulant, and they haven't been working very well. I've had negative physical and mental side effects that made me realize I need to stop this. What's been helping me has been focus on nutrition. I've been vegan for about 6 years, and so focusing on continuing to clean up my diet with my vegan diet has been really helpful. Learning to cook has been motivating as well. Building more of an exercise, I don't want to say routine, but what helped me was building a love for exercise. It's less, oh, I go on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays, and more like, I'm bored, I'm tired, and annoyed at stuff. I should work out. And then that helps me quite a lot as well. I think the biggest shifts for me have been basic health shifts, more sleep, better nutrition, and more of a focus on that, better exercise and the types of exercise I love, like boxing, tennis, and weightlifting.
It gives you an excuse to take better care of yourself, right? To have that label.
Yeah. And it also makes me feel confident in the sense of, oh, I'm really taking care of my ADHD by doing these things. So I stack on those mental benefits.
Do you find that you're talking to yourself differently, like you're kinder to yourself rather than saying you're a total failure all the time?
A lot of my language has shifted from I am this, which is shame language. I know Brene Brown talks a lot about, oh, I'm a bad person versus I did a bad thing. It's embarrassing when I completely forget something on my schedule, but I don't say, oh, I'm horrible at time management. And man, for some reason, my time management was not on 10 today. It's a lot more solutions focused. It's a lot more next time and learning focused. It's more coaching focused rather than exploring the depths of my identity and how I see my identity. These things happen. I can be more gracious and compassionate with myself. Am I perfect in that regard? Do I have absolutely no shame? Do I never feel nervous before public speaking? No. But it's a lot easier because I have those tools and that practice.
You're going to be a great ADHD coach, Sammy.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
A lot of your clients for public speaking, you've noticed that many of them have ADHD and you're slipping into an ADHD coach in that regard?
Oh, I'm glad you asked that. What I've noticed is I've had clients who disclosed to me that they have ADHD and that they knew it was impacting their speaking and their confidence. I've had folks who they didn't specifically disclose ADHD. I'm not here being an armchair psychiatrist or diagnosing them, but different ADHD traits that are coming in where I noticed that person trying to suppress them under the guise of professionalism. Oh, I can't speak too fast because then people think I'm rambling. And there are times in public speaking when it's totally appropriate to speak fast. We want to vary our energy to engage our audiences. We want to give power and credence to our experiences. If we're running through the forest, running away from a bear, we might want to speak fast and share that energy. There's always a time and the place for our ADHD traits to come into our speaking to be truly authentic. The LinkedInification of speaking is I must stand like this, wear a suit, and be monotone. That's not necessarily how someone has to be. They can be themselves, but perhaps in a way that's more polished, that they feel more comfortable and intentional with.
That's really sounds terrific. I'm with you there. Yeah, but it does feel like being chased by a bear to be public speaking, in my experience. How did you get into that career? What led you to be a public speaking coach?
I've been a coach for most of my career. I started in career coaching at my alma mater. It was a lot of storytelling coaching, uncovering someone's strengths, vision, and ideas. It was reframing what someone said, not just to industry language, but also to language that put them in a really great light. But it wasn't a light that was like, oh, we're exaggerating your experiences. We're fluffing up your resume. I felt like a lot of students at that time were like, whoa, I didn't know I was that impressive. And I said, yes, I've seen it this entire time. That is what made me realize that even though I have a really long career in higher education, and I love working with students, isn't necessarily being in the educational institution, but it's the coaching aspect of it. How can we shine a light on what's best about people and have them truly believe it and then embody it? That's beautiful. That's what I really love doing. A few years ago, I had a good buddy who was a public speaking coach. He trained me so that we could work together with senior leaders, vice presidents, CTOs for group coaching, for one-on-one coaching. It was pretty much a 1 year intensive for me. I was just a couple months ahead in coach training compared to the folks we were coaching. And so I had to learn on the fly. That's another place where I realized that, whoa, my ADHD traits of jumping onto something, saying yes, learning super quickly, trying things out as we go,
Yeah.
and hoping for the best sometimes really came through. I did very transformative work for folks who didn't believe that they could be better speakers, just like I didn't believe I could be a better speaker.
That's terrific. One last question for now.
Yeah.
Did all of your family accept your diagnosis? Did they treat you different? How did that change things?
My dad pretty much framed like we were cut from the same cloth, so he was happy about that. He likes the things that we had in common. For my mom, it's not that she didn't agree with it, she just couldn't fully see it. I completely understand where she was coming from because I was masking for a lot of my life. I remember distinctly going through an ADHD website with her on Zoom. She's in Texas and I'm up here. Going through sentences of multiple traits. You feel like you have so much running through your mind. You feel like you can't sit still. You miss a lot of details on things that you're planning. I'm like, yep. She realized she couldn't relate to those things, but she could understand that I could. Really breaking it down, it was like ADHD psychoeducation for her to recognize, hey, I don't have this, but these are things that really resonate with my daughter. My sister also recently was diagnosed as well. I feel for my mom that she had 3 ADHDers in her house. She had no idea.
I'm just wondering when she was listening to you go down that list, if she was thinking about her husband at all, or if she
Yeah.
acknowledged his ADHD.
My parents did separate when I was a little bit younger. Doesn't mean that she didn't spend a lot of time with him and know his traits and whatnot. But definitely, I think when it comes to he and I'm a combination ADHD, although a little bit more on the inattentive side, and he was very hyperactive. I can see where she probably thought we were pretty different in that. Sammy is not a wild child like Rick.
Is there anything else you want to tell us before we conclude?
What I love to teach the folks public speaking, my goal is for them to not need me anymore because they become their own public speaking coach. For me, before medication, before ADHD coaching, before even therapy related to ADHD, the first intervention I had that helped me slow down my brain, organize my thoughts, feel calm and confident was public speaking training. A lot of public speaking training, whether it's for ADHDers or not, is teaching people how to slow down, trust their voices, express their expertise, and have structures to lean on so that they don't feel alone when they're about to highlight something that's important to them.
That's terrific. That's just the money shot of the whole interview. Do you have any special advice now for parents, given your experience, for parents of children with ADHD, girls in particular?
For young girls, let's see. Don't be afraid of a young girl having a lot of energy, being a big personality, and having a lot to say at home in the safest space that they can be to feel fully safe and try things out with less consequence if someone is being actively disrespectful or doing things that aren't appropriate for that family. That's important, but letting girls have full energy, letting little girls act like little boys, I think it can really change the game because it's not about letting your little girl have the energy of a little boy. It's about letting your little girl be herself.
It's really been wonderful to talk with you today, and I wish you much luck with your coach training with ADHD.
Thank you so much. I love the questions that you and Cynthia asked, and I want to stay connected with the Inattentive ADHD Coalition.
Yeah, I want to thank you, Sammy. It seems we just lucked into connecting.
I listened to your book in 2 days, mainly because I was traveling those 2 days and listening at 1.43
good.
speed, and
well,
I
thank you.
absolutely loved it.
Well, thank you. Yeah, if you have a chance to tell other people, because I was hoping to sell millions and I'm struggling to sell thousands.
I have been sharing it with my cohort mates, but I'll keep doing so.
Tell other coaches, because the coaches tell their clients to read it. That's where it would be helpful. And for people to have their families read it, because they don't know what's going on inside of us. All right. Thank you.
Y'all.
We believe all girls with ADHD should get a fair start in life by getting diagnosed by age 8. Visit us at www.FINDtheADHDgirls.org. Thank you.